Raul Valle was 16 when he says he entered a house party on May 14, 2022, hoping to diffuse tension between rival teenagers. Those tensions were stemming from an earlier fight and were reignited outside a Laurel Glen Drive home in Connecticut. Valle testified he felt terrified, pushed, punched, and overwhelmed by the crowd. Armed with a knife, he says he began swinging it blindly, flailing to defend himself and rescue a friend who was being beaten. He insists he didn't intend to harm anyone, claiming panic and fear drove him to act. Even though he admitted to stabbing 4 other teenagers, he maintains it's self-defense, saying he never aimed to kill. And now he's on trial facing murder charges and telling his story to the jury, and we have all the big moments. But first, Sean Diddy Combs' fate now rests in the hands of a Manhattan jury after a 7-week federal trial. 12 jurors, 8 men and 4 women, began deliberations on June 30th, tasked with deciding whether he is guilty of racketeering, 2 counts of sex trafficking, and 2 counts of transportation for prostitution. And tonight, we are live from New York with all the latest in the Diddy sex trafficking trial as the world waits for the jury to speak. I'm Vinnie Politan. Great to have you with us here on Closing Arguments. A big day in the Diddy sex trafficking case. We learned something. You know, the jury has questions and has had questions and has been sending notes, and now we know, along with those notes, is a partial verdict. A partial verdict telling us that they've reached a verdict on counts 2, 3, 4, and 5, but are still debating and deadlocked on the most serious charge, count 1, the RICO charge. And the question is, tonight, as that jury's gone home, everyone having this information, is this good news or bad news for the defendant? My initial reaction was bad news, right? It would be easier to say guilty on the seemingly lesser charges and debate whether he's guilty of the most serious, but if you found him not guilty of the transportation and the sex trafficking, could you then still find him guilty of the first? I guess anything's possible with the jury. Sometimes it follows logically, sometimes it doesn't, but we do have some sense of where they are. And the real question here is, did he cross the line? Did he cross the line in what he did in his actions? Because one of the questions involves things that happened between him and Cassie. And obviously, what happened in the hotel is crossing the line, but does it cross the line into a criminal enterprise, these actions of Diddy? It has to be what they're trying to figure out here. I think they know that's the most serious of all the charges. I would think the jury would know that. It is count 1, but maybe they don't. We don't tell them a lot when they deliberate. But I think the question really, big picture, is Diddy the head of this criminal enterprise? Is he crossing the line, or is this a case of government overreach, where the government has tried to literally make a federal case out of something that should have been dealt with in normal state criminal court, the type of abuse and allegations against him? Is it really a RICO case? And I think those are the things this jury is debating. You know, sometimes the jury will look at the letter of the law, and sometimes they'll look at, well, wait a minute, what does this really mean? Is this really what's going on here? So we're close. We're close to the end of this case. We are close to a verdict, but we are not quite there yet. Let's bring in Court TV legal correspondent Kelly Craft, who's joining us live from outside the courthouse, the federal courthouse in New York City, where it's been raining all day. There's been a cloud over Manhattan. It seems that there's a cloud over these deliberations at this point. Let's talk about this partial verdict, how it came down, any reaction, and what the response has been to getting word from this jury that, hey, we've reached a consensus on 4 of the 5 charges here.
Well, hi there, Vinny. Good evening to you. So, yes, partial verdict on 4 of the 5 charges. So that's 1 count of sex trafficking for Cassie Ventura. 1 count of transportation to engage in prostitution for Cassie Ventura, then 1 count of sex trafficking for the woman who went by the pseudonym Jane, and then 1 count of that as well, the transportation to engage in prostitution for the woman who went by the pseudonym Jane. So 4 of the 5 charges. Tomorrow they will come back here to continue their deliberations on that count 1. They had sent a note to the jury. This was at 4:05 p.m. Eastern Time, Vinnie. And so we had heard there was a note. So everyone rushes back inside. And before we found out what the note was, the reaction from Sean Diddy Combs was something I have not seen before. We have been covering this trial since May. Most days he walks in pretty good spirits. As the trial went on, we would notice he would get a little tired. But today, when his attorneys were showing him the information that was coming from the jury in regard to what they had said and that they had reached a partial verdict on 4 of the 5 charges, he was distraught, almost despondent. He had his head down. He sat back in his chair. He put his hand up to his head. He rested his head in his hand. It was as if he couldn't believe what was happening. But Vinnie, we did not know what the verdict was. So unless he knows something we don't, which he shouldn't, because the verdict would be sealed, but we couldn't believe his reaction. And then that's when we heard what the note said, was that they had reached a partial verdict on 4 of 5 of the counts there, Vinnie. But strong reaction from Sean Diddy Combs today. His attorneys were gathered around him almost in a circle. Brian Steele was doing most of the talking, and then Mark Agnifilo ended up kind of crouching down by him and saying something else. We did notice at the end of court proceedings today, Diddy had turned around and he mouthed to his family and friends, "I'm going to be all right." But he was really distraught, Vinnie.
Well, my guess is his reaction to this might be the same of my initial reaction, but a jury can do whatever they want to do. We never actually know what they're thinking until they tell us. And sometimes it doesn't follow logically what you would think the conclusion that they're coming to and what they're debating. I've seen very confusing verdicts in the past, so I'm still wide open to anything. My gut tells me it seems like he would be guilty of those charges. When we talk about the difference here, RICO is a potential life sentence versus the other 4 charges here.
Yeah, and Vinnie, so when we talk about transportation to engage in prostitution, the maximum there is 10 years. But then if we talk about the sex trafficking, there's a mandatory minimum of 15 years, up to life. But yes, the racketeering charge would be the most serious. But as you were mentioning, do the jurors even know that? It's not as if we as prosecutors could provide them that information saying that this is the most serious. Although I will say when the judge was reading the information regarding racketeering, he did tell the jurors in his jury instructions that, you know, this is kind of not the most interesting, but I'm going to try to make it interesting because the jury instruction in regard to racketeering was extremely long. But Vinnie, I'm with you. With that reaction I was seeing from Sean Diddy Combs today, I was thinking, is he thinking that the verdict on those is guilty? Because of the way that he was acting, it was something like I had never seen before from him. Now,
I want to put the pieces together here because this note came out, but they've sent other notes and had questions, and there was a question to review some of the testimony in the case, right?
Yes, so this was earlier today, and a note came out in which the jury was wanting a readback of some of the testimony, and they asked for many, many different parts of the testimony in regard to Cassie Ventura as well as Daniel Phillips. He is one of the male escorts who testified in this case. We do have a full screen made so we can show our viewers exactly what they were asking for. So they were requesting witness testimony from Cassie Ventura regarding the Intercontinental Hotel incident. Also Ventura's testimony regarding Cannes and the events immediately following there. This is in France when she was on the red carpet. Also Ventura's interactions freak-offs with escort Daniel Phillips, as well as Daniel Phillips' testimony about the Essex hotel. So we do have some images from that Intercontinental Hotel video. So prosecutors, federal prosecutors, really used that Intercontinental Hotel video throughout that case. The jurors wanted some testimony in regard to Cassie talking about what was transpiring on this very evening, as well as we all saw these photographs of her on the red carpet in France in that beautiful gown, and she testified how Sean Diddy Combs took his hand and pressed down on that beaded gown into her thigh and how it was hurting her. She testified emotionally to that on the stand. Jurors wanted some testimony in regard to that. Also in regard to Daniel Phillips and some of his information regarding the freak-offs that he would have with Cassie Ventura, in particular one part of that testimony in which he said that Cassie Ventura, as far as he knew, was not on any drugs when she was taking part in the freak-off, except for maybe one time when he showed up to do a freak-off and Sean Diddy Combs told him it's not going to happen tonight. We do have a little bit of testimony from AI that was generated from AI, going back and reviewing a little bit of Daniel Phillips' testimony. Why don't we go ahead and play that?
Let me ask you, as Mr. Combs was dragging Cassie by her hair to her bedroom, what did you hear Mr. Combs saying?
He wasn't saying anything while he was dragging her. She was yelling.
What was she saying?
She was screaming. And he, Mr. Combs, pulled her into the bedroom and I could hear him. What sounded like him slapping her.
Without speculating about what might have been going on outside of what you could see and what you could hear, can you explain to the jury why you didn't intervene when you heard Cassie crying and what sounded like smacks?
I didn't know what to do. I was shocked. In my mind, it was going through my head that if I tried to do something, I might lose my life.
So tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Eastern, jurors will be back here in Lower Manhattan to continue their deliberations on count one. That's racketeering conspiracy. Vinnie, I also just want to tell you that when we heard there was this partial verdict, people outside the courthouse started chanting, "Free that man, free that man."
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. All right. Kelly Craft outside the courthouse, thank you so much. I know tomorrow's a big, big day. Hopefully it's not raining, and we will speak again tomorrow night. Let's bring in some of our guests that we have tonight. Joining us, Matthew Mangino, defense attorney, former district attorney, and trial lawyer Thomas Farinella, who represented R. Kelly in his 2021 RICO sex trafficking trial, and legal and pop culture commentator Marissa George. Welcome to everyone. Thomas, I want to begin with you. Do you see any other scenario here? If they've reached a verdict on counts 2, 3, 4, and 5, but are debating RICO, is it possible that they have found him not guilty of those other 4 charges?
It's great to be with you, Vinnie, and thank you for having me on. You know, again, having gone through the Roberts case, R. Kelly's case, and something very, very similar, there's an enormous amount of information. In Roberts' case, there were a lot of more counts, and there were 13 racketeering acts. So the fact that they were able to quickly figure out those the 2 through 5 demonstrates that they sort of they understand exactly, you know, where they want to go with those acts. But the main act, the racketeering act, it's, you know, I think it could be a timeline problem. Perhaps, you know, that they don't know if it was continuous. They don't know if this enterprise was designed for the purposes of facilitating criminal activity. So there may be some confusion there, and there may be some disagreement. If that's the case, then perhaps the question that you asked, the 2 through 5 counts could be guilty.
Could be guilty. Matthew Mangino, do you see any scenario where he could be not guilty of 2 through 5 and they're still debating RICO?
Well, yes, Vinny, I could see a mixed bag. I could see him being guilty, for instance, on trafficking and prostitution on those 2 counts, and not guilty on the sex trafficking, and they're still debating the racketeering. And the reason I say that is because, as I understand it, one of the predicate offenses of the racketeering is the sex trafficking. And so if they had found him guilty, say, of sex trafficking, then I think they might have had an easier time guilty on all four in getting to guilty on the racketeering. But if they found him not guilty on sex trafficking and guilty on trafficking and prostitution, they could still be debating the racketeering charges based on the other predicate offenses.
Okay. So in other words, they could be doing anything right now. Let me ask you, Marissa, your thoughts about the description of Diddy today inside the courtroom from Kelly Craft. Unlike any other moment of this case, what do you make of that?
You know, I think that Diddy has felt pretty confident throughout this entire trial, and he finally got hit with reality, in my opinion. I think hearing that the jury has reached a verdict on, counts 2 through 5 was very telling for him, and I think scared him quite a bit. So just to hear that he was, showing a lot more emotion than usual was pretty significant. I think, tomorrow, hopefully we'll hear a verdict, and, we'll see what his reaction will be, but I don't think it'll be good.
Thomas, what is everyone doing tonight? And let's start with the defense. Like, what are they saying? What are they doing? How do you prepare for tomorrow? What are you thinking about?
Well, I can say this: in a case of this magnitude, with a high-profile client, you have to prepare your client for the worst. You have to try to get your client into the mindset that, you know what, things may not work out, but you have to maintain hope. And they're probably doing the same thing I'm doing, is going through the verdict sheet, trying to figure out where they were going with how they're gonna, what their verdict will be. And if you look at one of the racketeering acts, they did want the definition of distribution, which is the last racketeering act under count 1. So, however you want to read the tea leaves, they are grappling with it. And I think that, at this point, you tell your client and you try to prepare for the worst, you hope for the best. And I agree with the other commentator that this could be, a mixed verdict in count 2 through 5. It doesn't mean that they have to find guilty in all or not guilty in all. It could be guilty on 1 or 2 of the counts and not guilty on the others. So, I think, though, as from the defense perspective, if they're grappling with racketeering and it ends up in a mistrial, or they're deadlocked on racketeering, that's the worst of the worst. So the government will have to determine whether or not they want to recharge, but at least they're still deadlocked on that racketeering. And the other counts do carry heavy sentences, but the racketeering is what gets you the long time sentence.
Yeah, that's potential game over stuff. Matthew Mangino, so we could be talking about the mixed partial verdict, which is the one everyone hates because it's partly guilty, partly not guilty, partly hung. I've seen it before. It's not as common on such a small, where we're only talking about 5 charges here. I've seen it in cases where we had 19 counts, but here there's only 5. What are your thoughts if it ends up mixed partial? Does the government try him for RICO again, or do they move on and spend our federal resources in other places?
Well, I would suggest moving on, and this is why. I mean, they started out with, kidnapping and arson and jury tampering, and they had to let those go before they even got to the jury. There now may be some question, certainly there is some question about the validity of these other predicate offenses, and all they need is 2. So apparently they don't have 2 predicate offenses that they believe the government has proven beyond a reasonable doubt. So this doesn't look like the kind of case, especially if it's a mixed verdict on the 4 counts, that you'd want to try again. That just doesn't seem to have what you originally thought it did in terms of this criminal enterprise.
Let me ask you, Marissa, if it does end up being mixed partial verdict, and let's say Diddy does 10 years and gets out, does he have, what kind of life would he have at that point? If he gets convicted here, goes away for a while, but then comes out when he's, 60, in his 60s.
It's funny you asked that, Vinny, because I was on TikTok Live today talking to my, TikTok fans about what are we canceling Diddy or are we not? I believe, he comes out of prison or whatever sentence he ends up serving, if he does, I think he comes out still being very much lifted up by a big fan group. He has a big fan base that still supports him very strongly throughout this entire trial, no matter what they've seen, what evidence they've heard or seen. So I think he'll get, if he does serve time and he gets out, before he passes until an old age, I think he will probably live a very comfortable life in hiding, most likely.
All right, our guests are staying with us. When we come back, we're going to talk about some more of the questions and how they may work into the analysis of what's going on with this jury. Plus, coming up next hour. Tonight on Vinnie Politan investigates outrage in Idaho as the family of Kelly Gonsalves reacts to the prosecutor's decision to not seek the death penalty and give a plea deal to their daughter's alleged killer and mass murderer. Tonight, we take a closer look.
Join Court TV's Vinnie Politan with the latest and breaking true crime stories.
Now, let's look at the other side of all of that.
Vinnie Politan investigates tonight, 9/8 Central, only on Court TV.
What happened that night? Are you not prepared to take responsibility for any of your crimes?
Interview with a killer. Marathon starting Friday, 11/10 Central, only on Court TV.
What kind of drugs kept you awake?
Ecstasy and Molly, for sure. We started to do other drugs, like cocaine, later on.
Who gave you the ecstasy?
Sean.
Who gave you the Molly?
Sean.
Who gave you the cocaine?
Sean.
Who gave you the drugs you used every time you saw Sean?
Sean.
What drugs did Sean give you during that period?
Ecstasy, Molly. Sometimes there was cocaine. Sometimes there was something called K, which was ketamine.
Where did they get the drugs? Jane and, of course, Cassie Ventura. That's some of the testimony from the case against Diddy. Why is that important? Because drug distribution is part of this case. Take a look. The jury had a question about this. This was jury note number 2. Drug distribution, referring to page 37 of the jury charge. If a recipient wants, requests, or asks for controlled substances and an individual hands over controlled substances to the requester, has the individual who hands over the controlled substances distributed? How about that? They want to know. If a recipient wants or requests or asks for it and someone gives it to them, is that distribution? Here was the judge's answer. Drug distribution. Over the objections, judge said he would send the jury a note directing them to lines 1 to 3 of page 37. Distribution, definition, actual, constructive, or attempted transfer to deliver, pass over, or hand over something to another person or cause it to be delivered, passed, or handed over to another. Distribution does not require a sale. Let's bring back in our guests. Still with me, Matthew Mangino, Thomas Farinella, and Marissa George. All right, Matthew Mangino, this is a big deal, right? Like drug distribution, we think of it like somebody selling drugs. You know, either the guy in the street corner or the drug kingpin, someone like that is involved in drug distribution. But the judge has instructed the jury, you don't have to sell it. You just got to give it to them. Is that a big problem here, you think, for Diddy?
Well, yeah, based on the testimony that we've heard, I mean, a lot of people have that misconception, you know, this idea of a drug dealer, and that's who can get arrested for, you know, possession with intent to deliver or delivering drugs. But that's not the case. Simply handing over drugs to somebody, providing drugs to somebody is a criminal act under the statute, the same as selling it. And here, we don't hear about Diddy selling drugs to Cassie or to Jane. We hear about him giving drugs. And so that's an important question. And certainly, again, going back to racketeering, one of the predicate offenses is drug dealing, and that is merely handing that over to another person, not selling it.
Yeah, and Thomas Farinelli, isn't this kind of the federal government being a little disingenuous when it comes to RICO and drug distribution? You're going to get a guy on RICO for giving his girlfriend drugs? Like, to me, that was never the purpose of this law. Like, and I'm a prosecutor, I get it, but I was a state prosecutor where, you know, a crime happens, we try to figure out who did it, and then we prosecute them rather than inventing new laws to try to sweep people up. Like, I get it going after Don Corleone, right, with RICO, but going after Diddy for giving Cassie or Jane drugs, he shouldn't be doing it. You can call it drug distribution, but you make it a predicate for RICO?
Well, Vinny, listen, you know, I argued this in Robert's case. I said if the government is allowed to go down this path with Robert, they're going to be able to take legitimate businesses like being a you know, superstar musician and turn it into a RICO enterprise, and that's exactly what they did. And I agree with you, Vinny. They are being disingenuous, and so with that being said, the government has all the advantage, right? They have the full resources of the government. They were able to successfully try a number of these type of racketeering RICO cases with sex trafficking and Mann Act over the last several years. Robert being the, you know, very similar to Sean Combs, obviously, because they took this normal business, this, you know, this enterprise and made it illegal, made it illegitimate. So it became that the musician's sole purpose was not to produce music and not to make money and to be successful, but to have this, you know, this enterprise with all these bad things, and you know, it amounts to bad choices. These are bad choices. These are not good lifestyle choices. But to criminalize them, these are independent events. These are adults who are engaging in sexual relationships that are consenting. This is not RICO. This is not, you know, the racketeering or the, you know, the gambling rackets where in 1970 when they passed it to stop the mob, which it successfully did. But this is nowhere near that. They're criminalizing legal behavior, and I agree with you. It's a huge government overreach, Vinny.
Yeah. Marissa, like the behavior, the video, you know, beating Cassie, all that, that's all criminal stuff. We know that. There are state courts that can handle cases like that. This is, though, a federal RICO indictment. We're talking about a life sentence. You know, tonight we're talking about a life sentence for Diddy, while the Menendez brothers, in cold blood, murder their parents, and they're going to be walking out. Like, I'm trying to get some sense of justice here. What's the perception of Diddy right now? Is it that he is a victim of government overreach, or he is a bully and a man who has taken advantage of his power?
I honestly think we're seeing it both ways. I think he's, again, has a very strong fan base. People believe that, yeah, the government is overreaching here, that they're trying to take down this man who has, you know, been a music mogul for, you know, decades. So there's that side of it, and then there's the other side of it where, you know, you see the video of him abusing Cassie, and you hear about the evidence and what the testimony has been like, and it's hard for you not to kind of say this is a bad man who's used his power in the most egregious ways. So honestly, I think it goes both ways when it comes to public opinion.
What does your gut tell you tonight, Marissa? What is your gut? I'm just going to ask you what your gut is telling you tonight.
Yeah. My gut is definitely telling me that I think, you know, I think he might walk with the RICO. I think that it is a bit of an overreach, but I do also believe that the prosecution has a very solid case. So my gut, I think he will be found guilty on some charges. I think it will be the split verdict with the hung jury.
All right. Marissa George, thank you so much for joining us. Matthew and Thomas are going to stick around. Got another big case here on Court TV that people have been watching. Oh, my goodness. You talk about dramatic testimony. Raul Valle in tears, saying he was scared and terrified when he had a knife and was stabbing people. He's on trial for murder. We've got his testimony plus the testimony of his girlfriend coming up.
It's hard that I lost my best friend, and I'm sad. I'm confused.
On May 14th, 2022, 4 Connecticut high school students were stabbed outside of a house where dozens of underage kids were drinking and partying. One student, 17-year-old James McGrath, was killed.
I don't know why it would happen to him or anyone, and it's hard to accept.
Jimmy McGrath was a high school junior and star lacrosse player. The news of the stabbings sent shockwaves through the community.
I think that sometimes we as a whole get desensitized to these types of events, but when it hits home, you know, it's hard because they're your neighbors, they're your friends, they're your classmates, they're your associates in work, and, you know, they're a family.
Your Honor, we have Raul Valle on the Part A docket today.
Raul Valle, whose nickname is Lido, was 16 years old at the time of the incident. He's being charged as an adult. He's now 20 and faces a murder charge as well as 3 assault charges. Prosecutors say there were 2 fights at 2 different houses that led to the tragedy. The trouble began at a party for students from St. Joseph's High School, where witnesses say Raul Valle got drunk and then got into a fight with another teen, Ryan Hines. After the fight broke up, Valle and several of his friends tracked Hines down to a second party about 1.5 miles away, where dozens of kids from Shelton High School were partying. The situation spun out of control, and a brawl ensued between Valle and his friends and the teens at the second party.
We just want to make sure that there's no animosity between students of different schools, because this was a tragedy, but it wasn't a tragedy created by a rivalry.
Hines and 2 other teens were stabbed but survived their injuries. Jimmy McGrath later died. McGrath didn't attend either school and is described as an innocent bystander who was trying to break up the fight.
We've been surrounded by love, and that's helped.
Raul Valle pleaded not guilty and is asserting a self-defense claim. Prior to the start of his trial, he had twice rejected a 40-year plea deal. If he's convicted of murder, he could be sentenced to between 25 and 60 years in prison.
And he took the stand in his own defense. Dramatic moment inside the courtroom. Let's take a look.
Do you recall yesterday you had described for us that there were essentially 2 groups that started to form, one that was dealing more with Mr. Da Silva and one that was dealing more with you?
Yes.
As you began to try to back up, what happened at that point?
I got hit.
Where did you get hit?
It was just side of my head, I want to say, but I couldn't really tell where. Everything just went black.
When you say everything went black, what's the next thing that you remember?
My face was in the ground.
Put us there on that lawn with you in the fetal position. What were you feeling?
Hopeless, scared, terrified.
Why hopeless?
Because they just weren't stopping.
What happened next?
As I was in the fetal position, covering the sides of my head and the top of my head with my forehead into the dirt, I was almost like hunched over, and then I reached in my pocket and grabbed the knife.
What were you thinking when your hand touched that knife?
It felt like the only thing that would help me. After I took the knife out of my pocket, I started waving and just stabbing in every direction, just flailing my arm around.
Did that seem to have any effect on the attack?
No, it made me more scared.
Why did it make you more scared?
Because it didn't change what they were doing, and it didn't stop them from doing anything. As soon as I looked for Tyler, and I saw him getting beat on, I couldn't just let him be there alone. I felt like I had to save him.
Did they give you any indication that they were just going to let you go?
No.
What did they do?
They stepped closer, and then I got hit. I just remember immediately after I got hit and fell, I swung.
What were you swinging at?
Anything.
What were you aiming for?
Anybody who was coming at me.
What did you find out?
That somebody died.
How did you feel when you learned that?
I kept saying, no way. Like, that's not possible.
Did you want to kill any of those kids?
No.
Did you want to hurt any of those kids?
No.
What did you want to do when you were down there on that ground and all those fists were punching you and those legs were kicking you?
Get them away from me.
You could have stayed at the corner of Laurel Glen and Farmhouse Road, correct?
Yes.
But you didn't do that, did you?
No.
And you got back in that car with the knife.
Yes.
And you indicated on direct examination you were scared to get back in the car, right?
Yes.
But you did it anyway.
Yes.
And you stabbed Ryan Hines in his chest and puncture his lung, correct?
Yes.
Like this, right?
I wasn't aiming or anything.
And you stab him in the side. He states 89, right? That's not a swipe. Would you agree? That's a stab, right?
Just flailing my arm around.
That was a
All right, let's bring back in our guests, Matthew Mangino, Thomas Farinella. We're talking about bringing a knife to a fist fight. That's what this is. Is that self-defense, Matthew?
Well, they're certainly trying to make it self-defense. Throughout this trial, Valle's attorney tried to set the circumstances that there was a mob of people and they were being attacked and the vehicle was being attacked. But Connecticut is not the same as Texas or Florida. They don't have a stand your ground law. You have a duty to retreat. And there has been testimony here that Valle, the defendant, was able to get away to go to the car and then came back. And if that's the case, he could have kept going. And he has that duty to do that. So that is going to have a huge impact on his self-defense claim in this case.
Thomas, what do you think of his testimony? Will it have an impact on this jury?
Vinnie, listen, the testimony was gripping. It's such an unfortunate situation, and it's sad in and of itself. So, but I found his testimony to be somewhat credible. To the extent that what Matthew just said doesn't hold up, and the jury actually credits it. I think they could side with him in this instance. It does remind me of the Daniel Penny case and what's not present. So here, that duty to retreat is a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's take a listen. We have some more of the testimony. This comes from young woman, girl, who was his girlfriend, is no longer. Mackenzie Trafficante, former girlfriend of the defendant.
I had objected multiple times to us going, and he didn't stand up for me or say anything in that regard. I didn't want to go to Tyler Rich's house.
Why didn't you want to go to Tyler Rich's house, Mackenzie?
Because I grew up in Shelton, and a bunch of people who I was friends with, I knew would probably be at that party. So it seemed as if there was some type of confrontation going on between them, and I knew I didn't want to be a part of it. I grew up with Jimmy.
And at what point, Mackenzie, did you learn about what happened that night to Jimmy?
When I had gotten home, I went to bed. I figured I'd wake up in the morning and it would have died down, or, if there was a fight, something would have died down. And I was woken up in the middle of the night. The police wanted to come question me. So I went downstairs to my kitchen table with my sister. And I remember my parents went to the door to open it up for the police, and I just remember my mom screaming. And then at this point, I was like, what's going on? Something seriously bad must have happened. Still, I didn't know the extent to what had happened. So they sat down, they just asked me about my day, like you're doing, about my night. And when they had left, my parents had told me that Jimmy had passed.
And what was your reaction, Mackenzie?
That was the worst news, the worst night of my life. I fell to the floor. My entire family fell to the floor.
Let me ask you, Matthew, the fact that we're talking about such young people here, who gets an advantage in that? The defendant or the prosecution? Because not only is the defendant young, the victim is young as well in this absolutely senseless night of violence.
Well, you're right, Vinnie. The defendant was 16 years old at the time. The victim, I believe, was 17 years old. All the witnesses in this case, the three surviving victims, all gave compelling testimony about what they went through and how this has affected their life. And now we hear from the defendant, who was himself somewhat compelling in explaining that he was terrified and how this impacted him. I'm not sure that it favors either side necessarily. It's a terrible tragedy. It's terrible decisions, on an evening where people should be out having a good time, and it turns into a tragedy like this. But I think we always know that youth is a mitigating factor sometimes in these cases, and certainly would be if there was a conviction and ultimately a sentence in this case.
Thomas, we have 4 victims. 3 of them, thank goodness, survived. Obviously, 1 did not. That's why it's 1 count of murder here. What do you see as justice in this case?
Well, listen, these are the types of cases that are hard, and this is the reason why people ask why I do criminal defense work. But, at the end of the day, you have to try to put your, no matter what the result, you have to try to put your client in the best position possible, and you're going to have to, in the event there's a guilty verdict, they're going to have to argue that he was 16 at the time. He's now 20. There's a lot of mitigation in between 16 and 20 to show that he was, he's now a law-abiding citizen. It was a terrible, terrible mistake. It was, and so they're going to have to make a compelling argument from that standpoint, which is going to be very difficult, and so I don't believe he had any witnesses testify on his behalf that demonstrated the self-defense. You have 3 victims who survived testifying. It's a lot. It's a heavy burden to overcome.
Absolutely. We have about 20 seconds left here. Matthew, what do you see as justice in this case?
Well, obviously, justice would be that he's convicted of these crimes, which we've heard a lot of testimony about, but ultimately that there is some maybe hope at the end of the line for him, that he can get into programming, treatment, things like that might ultimately make him a better contributor to society.
Big thank you, Matthew Mangino, Thomas Farinella. We appreciate it. We'll see you again really, really soon. When we come back, I will reveal something else you need to know tonight, plus coming up next hour.
Tonight on Vinnie Politan Investigates, will the accused Idaho 4 killer ever tell his victims' families why he did it? Will he tell the judge what happened at his expected plea hearing? Tonight, we investigate.
Join Court TV's Vinnie Politan with the latest and breaking true crime stories.
Now, let's look at the other side of all of that.
Vinnie Politan Investigates, coming up next, only on Court TV. This week,
a high school party turns deadly. Now a former student is facing a jury. We're breaking down each day's proceedings in the Preppy Party murder trial.
Opening statements with Julie Grant. Mornings at 8, 7 Central on Court TV.
Welcome back. Time to reveal something else you need to know tonight. Let's take a look at the big board. Out of jail, out of prison. Who is that? That is Ross Harris, Justin Ross Harris, the hot car dad out of Georgia. Remember, his hot car conviction was overturned, but he had to finish doing time for distribution of obscene materials to a minor. And that's the reason this little boy died, because his father was so distracted by his sexting. I want to take a moment and remember little Cooper.
Say Bob. Say Nana. Say banana. Cooper. Say Bob. Say Nana. Say banana. No, banana. All right, one more time. Cooper. Say ba. Say Nana.
Little Cooper Harris, we remember him tonight. We have another child who needs your help. Please take a look at your screen right now. This is Dajanece Goldsboro, missing out of Middletown, Delaware, 17 years old. Make a call right now. Let's get Dajanece to a safe place tonight. Don't go anywhere. We have another hour of live true crime. Vinnie Politan Investigates is next. In the meantime, please don't forget to hug the kids.